Okay, now that we're recording, I will get started. Hello, and welcome to the National Consortium of Clinical Educators' first resource sharing webinar of the year. My name is Jeanette Scardillo. I'm the current Vice Chair of NCCE, and on behalf of NCCE, I want to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. The resource sharing webinar series was developed based on feedback from you, our membership, to invite clinicians and ClinEd faculty to share some of the resources that they have developed and used in order for others to learn and then take those resources back to their own programs. There's been a total of 9 webinars that have taken place since July of 2021. And all of the previous webinars, if you're interested, can be accessed for free through the NCCE website under resource sharing webinars. We really encourage you to also look at the clinical education resources that are available through NCCE and ACAPT's website at acapt.org/ClinEd. Jennifer will be posting the link in the chat for your reference if you want to check out some of those resources. In addition, if you are not currently registered as an individual member through the ACAPT website, we invite you to do so. This will help to keep you updated on all things ACAPT, including any upcoming webinars or events that are being hosted. We'll put that link for registration in the chat as well. I have some additional ACAPT announcements. The first one, as you see on the screen, there are 5 spots left for the Clinical Reasoning Symposium that's taking place at Creighton University, April 14th through 15th. So if you're interested, please sign up ASAP at acapt.org/CR Symposium. Again, that's also on the screen. And then finally, ACAPT bylaw motions have been submitted and are currently being discussed on the ACAPT discussion boards. Any individual member can make comments in those discussion boards on the motion. So we encourage all of you to go and look at the motions that are being proposed to the bylaws and then comment as appropriate. These motions have actually been submitted by the NCCE board and are to advocate for increased representation on the ACAPT board and in elected positions. So now to today's webinar. So today we will be hearing from the clinical and academic pair from the University of Colorado, who are going to discuss some innovative CI training modules that are enhancing teaching and student learning in the pursuit of excellence in PT and PTA education. We hope that it's going to be information that you hear today that you can take back with you, discuss, modify, and use with your colleagues as you move forward with your own ClinEd programs. A little housekeeping during the webinar, all participants, we'd like to stay on mute. If any questions come up, there's the chat function, so please type them within the chat. Myself, Jennifer, and some of the other NCCE board members will be monitoring the chat. And then at the conclusion of the webinar, I'll be stating some of the questions that you have to our speakers. So now it is time for me to hand over the webinar to our 2 amazing speakers, Dr. Catherine Bilyeu and Dr. Jenny Logan.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Jenny Logan. I'll introduce myself here in a little bit, but really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you all today on creating a culture of excellence, specifically utilizing clinical and academic partnerships to cultivate clinical instructor development opportunities. So I'm Jenny Logan. I am an inpatient physical therapist at the University of Colorado Hospital. While I do have a few toes in the academic world, I am primarily a clinician. I've been an SCCE for 6 years. I still serve as a CI and have been working extensively with CU for the past couple of years on some CI development opportunities. And I'll let Catherine introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I'm Catherine Bilyeu. I'm faculty at the University of Colorado DPT program. Have a few different roles there. About half of my time is within clinical education, and we take a team-based approach. So we have our DCE and then a team of 4 under Jenny Rodriguez. So some of my areas of research and time spent in my ClinEd role are around clinician educator development, both for classroom teaching and clinical teaching. So that's my background, and I'm going to hand it over to Jenny to get us started.
So we have no disclosures. However, I do have a disclaimer that I have been doing some house renovation for the past 10 months. and have been waiting for a couple weeks for some finishing to happen. And of course it's happening today. So I do really apologize if there's any construction noise in the background. So our objectives for today are to outline the process for the collaborative development of an educational series for clinical instructors, considering the self-identified needs of CIs as well as constructs identified as key for facilitating excellence in physical therapist education. Secondly, we will share details of the CI development series, including content, instructional design, and timing of what we created. And lastly, we'll summarize the importance of academic and clinical partnerships and creating and promoting CI development opportunities. So to start with a little bit of background from the literature, we know that clinical instructor competence is very critical in order for our students to have good clinical experiences and then to come out as successful clinicians. Some of the things that the literature highlights as being important for CI competence are that they are a skilled clinician. However, that is certainly not a given that then they will be a skilled teacher. They need to have strong teaching and mentoring skills, excellent communication skills, demonstrate professional behaviors, and are a reflective learner and collaborator. And just like with clinicians, we hope that our CIs will move along the continuum from novice to expert. However, it's definitely not a given that that will happen. I can remember an instance when I had just come on as SCCE, and we do an observation with every student in CI. And this was a clinician who'd been a PT for 30 years, and he'd taken a student almost every year for 30 years. And I did an observation and provided some feedback to him. And he was so grateful because I think there had maybe just been an assumption that because he had so much experience as a clinician and as a CI that he already knew a lot of things and was an expert. And I think that definitely wasn't the case. I like this graphic over on the right. This comes from the nursing literature back in the 80s, actually, but I think it's still really applicable today. And I like this graphic, A, because it depicts mountains and hiking, which are near and dear to my heart living in Colorado. But I think it's also just a really nice depiction of what it looks like to move from novice to expert. It's definitely not a linear process. There are some detours and valleys along the way. And I think there are some supports that can be put in place to help our CIs move along that continuum towards expert more rapidly. And I think one of the things that can really help with moving our CIs from novice to expert is some strong CI development opportunities. The literature also highlights the need for a strong SCCE, I think, to help identify what some of those needs are and then to help figure out how to provide them. And then as we were talking about today, partnerships with academic institutions are very key. So hopefully you all are pretty familiar with this graphic. We presented a version of this talk at ELC in 2022, and there was sort of a joke at every talk that if you were presenting, you had to show this graphic. So here it is, but I think it's a really nice depiction of what does excellence in physical therapist education look like. And I think specifically today, we're focusing on the left-hand side, the culture of excellence. I think it's really important that academic settings and clinical sites have shared beliefs and values around CI competence and what's best for students. I think high expectations, certainly for students, but also definitely for CIs as well. We need to be holding them to high standards. And then again, this idea of partnerships between academic settings and clinical sites. So what does it really look like to have a fair and equal partnership? I think historically, and I can speak to this even when I came on as an SCCE in 2017, I think things have even changed in that time. But I think historically, clinical and academic relationships were maybe a little bit lopsided or a little bit unequal. The academic side would ask a clinical site to take students and, maybe there would be a site visit, but really not a lot of communication or interaction unless there was a very dire situation with a student struggling. And I think if that is the case, then it's really kind of hard pressed to refer to that as a partnership. I think really that's more of a relationship. I think a partnership, and again, the literature speaks to this, really needs to be mutually beneficial, fair, and responsible to support the needs on both sides. And obviously we recognize that There are a lot of demands placed on the academic setting. You're managing multiple cohorts of students and finding placements, and placements are canceling, and supporting students that are struggling. But I think also really important to recognize that as CIs, we have a very, very difficult job in really being asked to mold these students and to who they will be when they come out as clinicians, with a lot of other demands placed on us, like productivity. Literature also points to this idea of a shared vision. So having a shared vision between academic settings and clinical sites for students to really have the best possible clinical experience. And then a shared responsibility of the clinical site, I think really primarily coming from a strong SCCE and the academic program, to ensure that the CIs are really ready and competent, again, to provide the students with the best possible experience. So what does it really look like to establish or maintain a partnership? Some of you may already have strong partnerships. Others of you may be looking to more so establish some partnerships. So some of my thoughts on this, kind of from the literature, but also just from my own personal experience, I think from the academic side, very important to figure out who is your closest clinical partner. And that could be what is a site that takes a lot of students, like the most students from your program, or maybe geographically, it's the closest partner. I think providing some education on the importance of fair and equal partnerships is really key. I think there may be some clinical sites, some SCCEs that really aren't aware of the importance of this and what the literature is saying. And I think really making it known that you are willing to provide this support to the sites and clinicians. I'll get into it a little bit more exactly how our project came into being, but one of the things that made it very easy is that we knew that the ClinEd team over at CU was very willing to support this, so it made it very easy for us to reach out. And then from the clinical side, again, determining your closest academic partner. Again, it could be who you take a lot of students from, or geographically. I think one thing that's really, really important is determining what is most helpful and what gaps exist for CIs. So is that more continuing education, CI development opportunities like we're going to speak to today? Is it more support? Is it more resources? And I think really having the clinicians feel empowered to reach out to ask for what they need. Just as an example of this, I'd been kind of digging into this literature, presented about it at ELC, and we had an academic partner that I had a few concerns with, just related to communication and some demands that were being made of us, as well as some student concerns. And so I reached out and just expressed my concerns, and that we really valued this partnership, but felt like things were not necessarily equal and fair. And thankfully, they were really open to that feedback, and we've been able to move forward in a really positive direction. So I think clinical sites need to feel empowered, but I think in order to do that, they need to understand the importance of these fair and equal partnerships. So to go on a little bit more specifically about who we are and this project that we worked on, or still working on really. So I come from the University of Colorado Health System. We're a very large system throughout the entire state of Colorado. The sort of working group that started on this comes from the Metro Denver area, which consists of the University of Colorado Hospital inpatient, which is where I work. We are about 800 beds. We have about 145 therapists between PT, OT, and SLP. We have 2 SCCEs, which includes me. We also have a rehab educator that's similar to a nursing educator, but focuses on continuing education, onboarding, things of that nature. And then they also do have some involvement in the student program. We take about 30 PT students a year. I would say almost exactly half of which come from the CU DPT program. We do encourage the CI credentialing course to all of our CIs. And we were also providing some CI development opportunities, really just based on some of the needs that we had identified to our specific CIs. I will say those were not always particularly well attended, however. And then within the Denver metro area, we also have our outpatient clinics. There are 5 of them, which include a hospital-based clinic and then 4 satellite clinics, each having an SCCE at each clinic. Outpatient also has its own dedicated rehab educator. They also take about 30 students a year, half of which come from the CU DPT program, and they were also providing some CI development opportunities. So to speak to the University of Colorado DPT program, it is on the Anschutz Medical Campus, which is also where the University of Colorado Hospital lives. So geographically, we are very close in terms of partnership and location. It's a 2.5-year DPT program with about 70 students per cohort. And then as Catherine was mentioning, the ClinEd team is made up of 3.0 FTE faculty and then a 1.0 FTE admin. There are 5 clinical experiences, 2 integrated clinical experiences that are about 2 weeks long, and then 3 longer full-time clinical experiences. So like I had mentioned, we already had a relationship with CU. We already knew that they were willing to, provide some more support and resources to us. But really for us, the biggest impetus for change was the pandemic. It was COVID-19. Because of that, our administrative time was decreased as SCCEs. Our continuing education money was really slashed. And we did take a brief hiatus from taking students. I would say it was about 6 to 8 months. But after that time, we really ramped back up to taking about as many students as we were before. And we felt like if we are going to ask our CIs to continue to take students, especially in these continuing challenging times, we wanted to be able to provide continued CI development opportunities. So we as SCCEs were really looking for creative ways to provide the CI development in a cost-effective manner. So that's where we reached out to our academic partner. I bring up the pandemic because I think it changed so much for us. This was sort of a silver lining for us. I don't think you need a pandemic to make a change like this. This was just what caused us to change sort of so rapidly. But I think this can certainly be done without a global pandemic in your life. So like I said, we reached out. It was myself, the inpatient educator who was also serving as the interim SCCE, and then the outpatient rehab educator that had reached out to the ClinEd team at CU. And we just sort of informally, CU was very willing, very quickly jumped on this. We're very willing to help us out. So sort of informally met, decided our next steps included coming up with a needs assessment for what our CIs were looking for, really prioritizing those needs. And we wanted to make sure this was very collaborative between the clinical and the academic side. So in terms of the program development, we got together, the 5 of us. So it was, like I said, myself and 2 others from the clinical side, and then Catherine and Jenny Rodriguez from CU DPT program. We got together to brainstorm, what does this really look like? Again, decided that a needs assessment was really critical, as well as digging into the literature a little bit. Because our administrative time was decreased on the clinical side, it made the most sense for the academic team to develop these sessions and lead them, but definitely with input from the clinical side. We wanted the sessions to be standalone so that a clinician could attend just one session, but we also wanted the concepts to build so that if someone was attending multiple sessions, there would be similar threads. And then it was also important to us that we would debrief after each session as a team to figure out what went well and maybe what we wanted to do differently next time. So some of the things that came out of our brainstorming is that we wanted to make this multidisciplinary. So as I mentioned, in all of our settings, we have PT, OT, and SLP, and we really wanted it to be applicable across all disciplines. I think many foundational teaching techniques and information really is applicable to all disciplines. So we did not want it to be PT specific. We wanted it to be applicable across the continuum of student experiences. So work for a CI who had a student in CE1 all the way to CE4. And really important for us was that it was relevant for all settings. So within our system, we have acute care, inpatient rehab, outpatient, and within that it's ortho, neuro, oncology. Really, we span most settings with the exception, I would say, of maybe home health and peds, but really important that this be applicable to all settings. And then figuring out what topics we were going to address, what the timing and then implementation and delivery looked like, which Catherine will talk in more detail later. So as I mentioned, we created a needs assessment, and this was a survey that we sent out. The 5 of us really created these topics, and these came from several different areas. One was from things we'd heard from CIs that they were looking for. Also came from the SCCEs. So I mentioned earlier, we do an observation with every student in CI, and that just really allows us to have an idea of what gaps exist, maybe what themes we're seeing over and over that would be helpful to address. And then a little bit from the academic side about some teaching science and some more of those types of topics. So we sent out the survey. We got 32 responses, which we felt pretty good about. As I'm sure many of you know, it's hard to get a good response rate on surveys. And based on the needs assessment, the top 5 areas of interest were teaching techniques, clinical reasoning, student confidence, progressing students, and the use of questioning. And I am now going to hand it over to Catherine.
All right, we're gonna swap control here. Give me 1 second. Maybe. There we go. All right, so get everything organized here with my views. All right. Yeah, I want to add just one thing. I think when Jenny was talking about partnership, because that was such a big piece of this for us, that we really, really wanted this to be a collaborative process. This wasn't us driving information. We wanted the clinicians who reached out to us to really be a big part of planning, development, and delivery of these sessions as their, crazy caseload, especially during the pandemic, allowed, to let them enter this space of creating content to help the clinicians that they see practicing with students every day in their facilities. So that was a really important piece for us. And I think Jenny touched on a nice thing when she talked about partnership, where our partnership with the University of Colorado Health System has really grown to a really nice place that is, I hope for them, feeling more mutual versus a one-way relationship that I think exists in clinical education some of the time, or maybe even a lot of the time. And, she gave the example of, having a different academic relationship that wasn't as strong. And I think some of how our relationship has worked, and when you have a strong relationship, even with one partner, that creates that confidence for that SCCE and clinician team to go to other academic programs and say, hey, here's some things that have really been working well for us. What can we do that's similar to help us support your students really well? So that partnership piece was really incredibly important with this. So Jenny discussed the needs assessment that drove a lot of our sort of initial topics, because we really wanted to make sure we were meeting the needs of those clinicians in that setting, and within that health system. We wanted to make sure that what we were delivering really fit for them. So I've pretty deep in the literature on faculty development and excellence in PT education. So we shared a lot of the foundational information with the SCCEs that were involved with this. So some of the literature we dove into related to education was not only excellence in physical therapist and PTA education, but we also wanted to start filling that gap that's been identified in the profession around some of the learning sciences. So we looked at weaving in concepts of adult learning, constructivism, cognitive load theory, some of the foundations of experiential learning, and how frameworks of all sorts can really help support both CI learning and then translating that use of frameworks for supporting student learning. And then in terms of the faculty development literature, we really pulled from a lot of the really robust literature that's in medicine and nursing around supporting both clinical educators and clinicians who teach in classrooms, and really pulled out some of the common threads around clinician educator development. Really needs to be longitudinal, it needs to be ongoing, and they need repeated opportunities to visit and revisit topics that are presented in things like the CCIP. So that gives us a really nice foundation. then how do we allow our clinicians repeated opportunities to engage with those concepts that are taught? And the other big piece that we wanted to create was to help facilitate a community of practice. And with sort of one and done or online only, asynchronous modules, a community of support and learning doesn't exist. And we wanted to make sure that was a big component. So those were the things we really pulled from the literature. So we introduced the SCCEs to an additional framework for how we thought we could pull some of these concepts together. So I feel extremely fortunate that the SCCEs we work with in this system have really taken the initiative to look into a lot of the clinical education literature, which is amazing. So they were familiar with the Excellence in Physical Therapist Education model. So then we pulled in a faculty development framework to help show them how we could build a series of sessions for their clinicians. So we used this, I forgot to cite it on this side, this faculty development framework that is by Chick et al. It's in our reference slide. And this framework has also been cited in DPT literature as well as a nice framework for enhancing teaching skill in all PT educators. So these are the frameworks we grounded a lot of our work in. So when we looked back at the learning science components, we knew we really wanted to infuse all of these ideas into the sessions without them becoming too theoretical. And when we go through the different sessions, I'm remembering session 1, our SCCEs sort of threw up a little flag and said, this was maybe too theoretical. We need to bring it back to more practical. So we conscientiously wove some of the learning science ideas through these sessions and modified that based on the feedback from our team. So we knew we wanted these sessions to, again, include learning science principles. We wanted to draw on clinicians' past experiences with mentoring students. We wanted reflection to be a key piece of these sessions. We wanted them to be active. Again, we wanted to facilitate that community of practice piece and the value of repetition with these topics so that they could really learn how to efficiently incorporate a lot of the teaching strategies that we talk about in different education modules. So a lot of this really links to the idea of the master adaptive learner, and there's some brand new literature out that discusses how we should view educators in that same box or same realm as the master adaptive learner. How we learn as educators to get better really should be viewed from that same lens of the master adaptive learner. And that means it needs to be lifelong. We need to continue to revisit these topics. And we feel like these sessions really was a great stepping stone to do that for our clinicians. So we took all of this information, the needs assessment that the clinicians ran, the education literature, the faculty development literature, and we dove into developing these sessions. So we're going to go through, I'll start here first. So we really drew this information from the clinicians as well. We knew this needed to be something that they could attend, would attend. Like Jenny said, historically, some of the things they were trying to do independently were underattended with some really great ideas and great intentions. So part of our needs assessment and survey also looked into timing and how to structure this longitudinally. So we settled on sort of a lunch and learn type series. A lot of both the hospital-based clinicians and our outpatient clinicians had a lot of overlap where that lunch lies. And because this health system really supports clinical education, there was the ability to move lunches around because these were planned so far in advance. So the clinician schedules, we could try to overlap lunches. We settled on what looked like the best day of the week based on other meetings that particularly a lot of the inpatient therapists had to participate in. And we we set up the frequency of them a little bit more than quarterly throughout the year. So overall, we've done 7 sessions that come every few months for the clinicians, but they're mapped out really well ahead of time. And Jenny's team does a really great job of advertising them and keeping them on everybody's radar so that they keep that one lunch hour free. And then we thought really carefully about instructional design and how to best keep the interest and have the best engagement possible with clinicians, knowing especially early on that the clinicians had much lower exposure to formats like Zoom compared to how academicians and students were thrown into that environment. We had to think carefully about how to deliver this in a really good way, and then the formats as well. All right, so what we'll do here for the remainder of the time is I'm going to run through what each session was. We really wanted this to be a resource that other programs and other clinicians could take away. Obviously, in an hour, it's a little bit limited what we can include, but we hope this really gives a really good overview of what the objectives of each session were and how they were structured. And then we'll do a little summary of sort of what the takeaways were, both from the clinician viewpoint and from our development team's perspective. So for each of these sessions, I'm not going to read through the objectives. You can skim those as we go along, but that gives you a sense of what the content was. So for example, with this one, the first session we did, which was really driven by the needs assessment, was really to build on the ideas in the CCIP of how to use questioning as a teaching and learning strategy. So we went back a little bit to the science behind using questioning and how that can facilitate learning. We built on how you can intentionally use Bloom's taxonomy, not only to write objectives for your student, but how to structure appropriately leveled questions for your student. We had an activity around creating effective questions that really helped to facilitate learning and reflection. And then did a summary that brought all of these pieces together. So that's an example of how the objectives can show you a little bit of what some of the content looked like. So for some of these sessions, we really wanted to try to maximize our time, and we're still a little bit torn about how effective this was. We felt it was important to try to give a little bit of pre-work to show the importance of some of the foundational concepts that we'd be talking about in each session. When we surveyed clinicians early on, it was about 60 to 70% would complete the pre-work and the other chunk of attendees did not, which is maybe similar to our students, I don't know. But we played with the length of the pre-work, how early we advertised it and things like that to try to really maximize the clinician's ability to just skim some quick things and come with some thoughts in mind so we could really dive into some of the concepts. So for this session, we actually created a really short module that reviewed some of the background and science behind questioning and Bloom's taxonomy. We delivered this session by Zoom. We built on the module in sort of a mini lecture format. And then we always tried to have some sort of active learning component to each session, even though the majority of these were on Zoom, and it took a little bit of work to get the clinicians up and running with it initially, and then became, I think, more and more successful once they became familiar with how we were structuring these sessions. So for this one, we really had them draw on their experience with working with students and reflecting. We followed that activity with a question and answer session and then did a summary. And let me see if I can switch screens here quickly, and I'll show you an example of, so this is the worksheet that we used, which, oh, can you see that? Did that switch to the worksheet? Okay, great. I'll make it a little bigger. So we sent this worksheet to them ahead of time so they had access to it. And then when we put them in breakout rooms, this is an example of the type of activity we might have them do. So we gave them some guiding questions in small groups and then had them think about a specific student that they had worked with, where what type of questions could they have used maybe to help that student's learning. So we use different components out of the literature. So Schoen's reflection in, on, and for action, and then another type of reflection out of the literature that focuses on these other things: content, process, and premise. So this is an example of how we guided them through an activity in breakout rooms without having a leader in every breakout room. All right. So that was session 1. Session 2 was a little bit different. This was our lowest attendance at this session. We were really fortunate enough to have the crew from Creighton University, who's developed the clinical reasoning blueprint. Earlier in the same year, they had done an online continuing education session for clinicians across all of Colorado. And we really wanted to help clinicians dive more deeply into the presentation that they had done. So we made a prerequisite for this session that they needed to have attended this session. And we had really good attendance at the Creighton online session, but then only 10 of those clinicians attended this. And we just dove more deeply into how they could use some of these blueprint activities that comes out of Riley et al.'s recently published, really walks you through the whole blueprint. We really focused our activities on how could they specifically use these clinical reasoning, both assessment and facilitation activities with students in their settings. So that's how we structured this one. And again, this one was on Zoom. And then I think this one, Jenny, was our disastrous hybrid attempt at delivery. And it was challenging simply because there are obvious, the hospital systems are set up differently in terms of IT and tech, and having a live group in front of us plus an online crew was really challenging, both from a technology perspective and engagement perspective. I think many of us have tried these hybrid approaches, and this was very challenging to deliver. It was a great session, but it was challenging to deliver. So this one really focused on teaching strategies. The objectives you can read on the left there. We opened it with a case and then applied sort of mini lecture concepts to the student case. They again did an activity guided by a little cheat sheet. It had different specific learning strategies for different levels of learners. And then they were mapping out how they could use these strategies in their specific setting with the level of students that they typically take. So that was our session 3. Session 4, this was a really fun session on addressing student confidence. And this one, again, was really driven by the clinicians. Jenny and her team really did a great job of pulling out from the clinicians, you mentioned confidence in the survey, but what do you want us to do with this? So they really looked at, how do we manage the student that's overly confident? How do we manage the student that's underly confident? So we got a little bit creative, and Jenny Rodriguez pulled this TED Talk that she really loves by Carol Dweck, who's heavily involved in education, and it's called The Power of Yet. And so we had them watch this very short TED Talk prior to the session. We reviewed the components from the TED Talk verbally so that if people hadn't watched it, they had at least the gist of it. And then we used that as the foundation for discussing the concept of confidence and how we can use learning strategies to support student confidence at that, what from the clinician or CI view is appropriate for that level of learner. We did this one by Zoom. We again had a lecture, a little mini lecture that talked about what contributes to students' confidence. And specifically, how does confidence impact learning? If it's too high or too low, how can that negatively impact student learning? And then we worked through specific strategies that supports building or moderating student confidence through reflective strategies to help a student see really where they're performing and how to get their confidence level to align with where they're performing. This one, we used more of a large group discussion format to have people both in the chat and when they were willing to unmute, really share examples, specific examples of students who maybe were overly confident or underconfident. And then we talked through strategies of how they could have approached that to help them see what they can do next time with students. The fifth session was on how to progress a student. And this one was kind of nice. Again, this topic was driven by the SCCE side, and Jenny Rodriguez and I sort of went, how is this going to be different from what we've already covered? And then that created this great opportunity to, this is a perfect session to pull everything together again and have them revisit teaching strategies, confidence, use of questions. And then what we did was we aligned it to specific student levels of learners, and how different strategies might be more applicable for a first-year student, and then more complex teaching strategies might be more applicable for the more advanced learners. So we helped CIs really see how they can choose from a list of strategies for different levels of learners, and even within a single long-term experience, how they could progress from more novice-based teaching strategies and learning strategies to more complex. And this was another one where I'll share quickly what that looked like. So this, oh, that's not the right one. Pull it over here. So again, we provided this ahead of time and then gave them this as a guide for the activities in terms of how they can structure the experience for students. So they had examples here of how you can start simply, for example, chart review with supervision, to how it can look with the more advanced learner. And I'll just scroll through this. We talked about how the environment can impact this, and how an early student or a student who's either in their first experience or just earlier in a particular experience, how you can modify the environment for those different levels of learners. And then brought in the teaching strategies for, again, how early, middle, or late. And again, that can be within one experience or across student experiences. So they had this as a tool when they went into their small groups to do their activities. And that was session 5. And then our final 2 sessions we've completed recently. So clinicians really wanted assistance with how to manage time and space. And so this one, again, drew from a lot of our prior sessions, and we asked them to come having simply reflected on what do they view in their specific setting with their patient population, what are facilitators and barriers to simply having a student in their facility. So we talked a lot through creative strategies for managing space in small clinics, in crowded offices, and just came up with a lot of listed ideas. We did, I think this was another one where we did a flood the chat activity where people just shared ideas and then we consolidated them. We really focused in this session on the idea of preparation and setting clear expectations for students. And I think the big thing that came out of this one is the idea of giving CIs permission, for lack of a better word, that you don't have to have a student in tow from 8 to 5 every day, seeing patients, and really walked through ideas for how they could create time and space for themselves outside of mentoring that student, regardless of whether this is a first-year student or a terminal experience. And this was really well received in terms of strategies. I think we underestimate how helpful it is for clinicians to hear that it's okay to not have a student with you all the time. And then our final session was on supporting professional behaviors, and just briefly, this is the session that we really use the professional behaviors for the 21st century document to guide this. We gave it to them ahead of time, asked them simply to skim the different areas, and then really did a great, we did a really fun role play that Jenny Logan and Jenny Rodriguez did as a CI and a student. And then we really had the clinicians on the call dissect this role play and use the professional behaviors document to look at where were the students' gaps, what could the CI have done differently in terms of feedback, and provided some frameworks for providing feedback on these really complex affective skills. So this was a fun one that we brought in some different teaching strategies, including role playing. So those are the sessions that we've done so far. Very briefly, this is sort of our outcomes from this program. We had between 30 and 60 attendees at all of the sessions, except that one where we had a prerequisite. We collected sort of satisfaction and CI input after each session, and then tried to incorporate that in subsequent sessions. We gathered thoughts from the team, like I had mentioned about, we need to move away from the theoretical and continue to make these really practical. And we reviewed challenges to try to just make these as easy and usable as possible for the CIs. We also had another faculty member of ours just do a little like mini qualitative look at how did this whole process of developing these sessions impact our partnership from our academic view and from the Jenny's team's view. And these were the themes that came out of that. And we really looked at where our successes and the positive comments lay and where each side felt we had room to grow. And we incorporated those things in those final two sessions. One of them being, as the clinicians sort of emerged from the pandemic, that Jenny's team really wanted a little bit more active role in both developing and presenting. So we wove those into those subsequent sessions. So I'm going to end with this elephant in the room slide here. So I get a lot of questions in my line of faculty development work in terms of how does this differ from the CCIP? I think I've touched on a few things, and the big thing to me is really it allows us to go deeper. It allows us to give CIs the opportunity to revisit those really foundational activities and concepts that the CCIP lays. We hugely advocate that our clinicians start with the CCIP, and Jenny's team advocates for it as well. And then we view this as an opportunity to build and fill gaps and capture people that maybe aren't doing the CCIP. So we view this as the same, different, supplementary really, and it allows us to build. It really helped us to tailor the concepts specifically to the University of Colorado health system was the other big difference. And it really allowed us to weave in this longitudinal approach and the community of practice. We had some really incredible feedback from clinicians on this was relevant, it was useful, it was practical. We had a clinician come up to us at CSM and say, I just wanted to say hi and put a face to a name and let you know how much our clinicians have enjoyed these sessions and we want you to do more. So we want to create this community so that these clinicians continue to be excited about taking students and feel really supported in their role. So that's my thoughts on that.
And I'll just add too that, you know, this continues, this is ongoing. We intend for this to go on in perpetuity. We're thinking about maybe revisiting some of the topics we've done, maybe that had lesser participation, but you know, we're not complete with this. I think we've found it to be very successful and intend to continue doing it.
Great. All right, that's our content. And before we go to questions, I'll just say thank you so much to both ACAPT and the NCCE for giving us this platform to share our work. We want this to be shareable and usable.
Thank you, ladies. Elsa, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. I have to, let's see.
And
Jennifer, are you able to unmute her? Because I'm not.
Yeah.
There we go.
there we go.
Not letting me speak. I think this was fantastic. We're trying to do something similar, but back to the comment as to how is it different from the CCIP, I think that that's a very rich question and is multidimensional. I think it's tailored, is very tailored, is very specific, is very well thought out, and it comes full circle. And I think that also you allowed them to tell you what their specific needs were, and then again you tailor it to them. And then it was not because we're doing something similar, but we have different topics going on. What I liked is that you have a very structured sequence of events, you know, and like I said, you bring it full circle at the end as well. So I commend you for it. I think it's beautiful. I think that this is exactly what we did a needs assessment as well. And what we found is like, do you want money? Do you want accolades? Do you want this? Do you want? And at the end of the day, they were asking for the same exact thing, education, you know? And so I'm thrilled with what you did. I think that it's a very structured, very well thought out, very well put together process that I really, really like.
Thank you so much. And I think you highlight a really important point. If you go to the literature, it really supports this idea that we need to know what clinician educators need, and we can't rely only on that. And that's really reinforced in the excellence in education work by Jensen's crew, that there are gaps that all of us as educators don't recognize we have, particularly related to the learning science piece. So that's where we felt we could weave that in, make sure we were addressing that in practical ways, but then really let the clinicians drive it. So thank you.
And to the point of repetition, you know, you don't hear one thing once and it completely becomes integrated. You have to really hear it more than once and weave it through and then bring it together. So again, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
So one of the questions is, from exploration to implementation, how long did it take for you to go through this process?
So I think I reached out, it was probably in the fall of 2020. I'm thinking maybe it was November of 2020. Again, kind of right around when we started taking students again. And then I think we met pretty quickly. And then Catherine, I don't know if you have in your notes when we did that first one. I want to say it was maybe March of 2021.
I think it was actually earlier. I think we did our first one in February. Okay. And so it was relatively quick. Again, I feel fortunate. We've got a team, and I had a little bit of background set up with, we drew from some of the associated faculty training program that we've got established as well. So we drew some of the content from that, but really these team-based meetings that we had were extremely productive. In an hour, we were committed to, we're mapping out what the session is going to look like. And then our team took it and developed it. We gave it to them for review, and boom, we could implement it. And we developed as we went. We had the list, and then we developed the content as we went. So we implemented our first in less than 4 months.
Thank you. So one of the other questions, and you covered this a little bit, I think, with the qualitative stuff that you were collecting, but it says, did you have a feedback loop or evaluation process to determine if the sessions improve student learning, CI confidence, and then engagement overall?
So we looked at, I thought I had a slide in there, but I didn't. I'm going to stop sharing because we don't need to look at that anymore. We did surveys at the end of each one, and Jenny, maybe you can add in some of the details. So we looked at how they felt about content relevance. Was it useful? Was it going to enhance their teaching? We didn't specifically assess outcomes related to their confidence or student learning at this stage. We have not done that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've gotten really, really positive feedback in general from the sessions. Some, constructive feedback that we've tried to incorporate, but, perhaps a project for down the line to see how this is really impacting CIs, but I see some challenges
Yeah, and I'll add on the engagement front too. I think from the academic perspective, it was challenging initially working on Zoom with the clinicians, just because of I think their lack of familiarity initially. And then as they became more familiar, that's not where they spend all day like we do sometimes. So really trying to encourage the engagement was challenging up front. And I think that's really improved as they've started to understand how we structure these sessions, and that sort of participation is part of the game for how we're doing these.
Thank you. So we do have a few comments about whether or not you would be willing to share the content and how we could go about doing that.
Yeah, I think, Jenny and I have talked about this at length, and our team has. And one of the things that I can envision is sort of even just a Word document that outlines objectives and content that I think would give people a nice starting place. I'm happy to share that. This is in the best interest of our CIs, so we want to share.
Yeah, and
so I think we can come up with a mechanism to share it, and then we can let the ClinEd community know.
Yeah, I think, definitely happy to share. I think the important thing is, though, that we've tried to emphasize here is that this was really tailored to what we expressed that we needed. And so I think in doing something similar, it would be important to really have the input of the clinical site.
Yeah, like Elsa said, their needs assessment looked a little bit different, so their content might look a little bit different. But having even a structure layout and being able to pull from some of this, I think would give people a really nice starting place. So I see there's some, Cindy's got her hand up too, Jeanette.
Real quick though, we also have a request for references. So
yes, there's a reference.
Give that to us. We'll send that out. We can send that out to everyone.
You bet. Yeah. And if you post this, I don't know how ACAPT normally does this, but there's a reference slide at the end that was select references, but I can add to it. Yep.
Excellent. Go ahead, Cindy. I think Jennifer will have to unmute you. There we go.
I think I got it. Okay. Thanks so much for the presentation, you guys. Very intriguing. And, certainly as a CCIP trainer and somebody who's working on the booster modules as well. I mean, I fully agree and support you guys that, yes, we can take it so much further than what we can cover in the 2 days of that course. I'm curious where you say you want to keep this going. And so I guess I'm interested to hear a bit about your vision of what sorts of topics, like where else do you think you might go, or what do you think the value is, or is there a value of coming back and almost rerunning those courses, figuring maybe like new CIs coming on board and how to balance all of that?
Yeah, I think part of the vision is, almost everything you mentioned. The way that we run our associated faculty development program is it's cyclical, and we encourage people to come back to the ones they've come to before, because they're going to learn new things and they're going to interact with their peers in different ways. So we envision sort of restarting this soon. We were just talking about this. We envision another needs assessment. What gaps haven't we met? And then the other thing that I envision that we use again with our associated faculty training is at least an annual opportunity for clinicians that have attended one or all of these sessions to just come together with a real focus on the community of practice piece and share, what have you used, what's been not useful, share how you've integrated these strategies and where your successes and your challenges have been. So this sort of annual community of practice piece will allow for it to be ongoing as well.
Thank you.
Well, in the for time's sake, we're at 3 o'clock. I want to, again, on behalf of ACAPT and NCCE, thank all of you for attending. And I really want to thank Catherine and Jenny for sharing all of this fabulous information with us. I know there were some great questions, and I think these resources are going to be really beneficial to our participants. So thank you again. Hope you have a great day, and happy St. Patrick's Day as well this weekend.